The state, who should represent Connecticut in Washington? A U.S. Senate debate between Democrat Chris Murphy and Republican Matthew Corey. Straight ahead this Sunday morning, October 28th, 2018.
From Eyewitness News, Connecticut's most watched local political program, this is Face the State.
Good morning and welcome to this Face the State WFSB Senate debate. I am your moderator, Dennis House. Let's meet the candidates. We have Republican Matthew Corey and Democrat Chris Murphy. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today.
Sure.
Let's go through the rules. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and then the person who gets the question first will have 30 seconds to rebut. Toward the end of the debate, we will engage in a rapid-fire segment, which could include short answers or one-word answers in some cases. Our first question goes to Mr. Corey because you won the coin toss and you also chose your seat and chose to go first. In the wake of the vicious murder of Jamal Khashoggi, what kind of action should the U.S. take against Saudi Arabia, and should Pratt & Whitney stop selling materials to them?
First and foremost, Dennis, thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Senator, for taking time out of your business.
Good to be with you.
I know you were campaigning in Florida, so welcome back to Connecticut. It's a very delicate situation. We have a lot of ties with Saudi Arabia. We shouldn't punish the workers of the state of Connecticut or the country. There's a half a million jobs at stake for this deal. It's a complex weave with Israel, Saudi Arabia. They're a great ally in the Middle East. What we need to do is sanction the people that are involved. The cover-up was a huge mistake. We need to force Saudi Arabia to maybe release some of the prisoners of conscience. Take better steps for human rights over there. But it has to be a delicate situation, Dennis, because we have a lot of ties against the Iranian influence in the Middle East, and we need to be very careful what we do.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. Murphy, you have 1 minute.
So let's be clear about what Saudi Arabia did. They took a U.S. resident, they lured him into their consulate, and they killed him because he had spoken out against the Saudi regime. The United States needs to stand for something, and one of the things we should clearly stand for is the freedom of the press, both here and abroad. I think the Trump administration has been unbelievably weak, and I think that weakness really undermines America's strength all around the world. What I think we should do is cut off our support for the Saudi-led bombing campaign inside Yemen, which has killed thousands of Yemeni civilians, which has allowed for al-Qaeda to become stronger and stronger inside Yemen, the wing of al-Qaeda which represents the biggest threat to the United States. That's the clearest message that we can send to them. Because right now we are telegraphing to the world that you can come after U.S. residents, you can kill them with almost total impunity.
Mr. Corey, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Look, the $150 billion that went to Iran with that horrendous Iranian deal has helped Iranian-backed Houthi rebels cause discourse over there. There's not one country that would allow a Hezbollah-like terrorist group to sit on their border. We have mutual interests with Saudi Arabia and Israel to defend against terrorist groups. Iran is the #1 sponsor of terrorists. We've lost a lot of American lives, a lot of American soldiers due to that Iranian deal. There are proxy wars all over the country.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. Murphy, the next question goes to you. Senator Murphy, you voted against Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. 2 Supreme Court justices currently are in their 80s, so it's possible that President Trump will get to nominate another judge, perhaps 2 to the High Court. We've seen his list of possible choices. Are any of these acceptable to you, and what kind of jurist would be acceptable?
Well, you know, when I'm out there talking to folks in Connecticut, they tell me that they want a Supreme Court that squares with Connecticut values. That's what I've heard loud and clear. Unfortunately, President Trump has outsourced the decision about who gets selected to the Supreme Court to 2 right-wing political groups. He asked them to come up with a list, and he's going to choose from it. Almost everyone on those lists that these 2 political groups gave to President Trump would lead to the criminalization of reproductive health care in this state, would threaten the Affordable Care Act, which has delivered insurance to 200,000 Connecticut residents, would stand up for corporate rights instead of worker rights and consumer rights. So I haven't exhaustively looked at every single name on the lists that were provided to the president by these right-wing political groups, but I'm going to constantly ask questions as to whether these justices support Connecticut values or they support Donald Trump's values. And if they don't support Connecticut values, then I'm not going to support them.
Thank you. Mr. Corey, you have 1 minute.
Look, in 2016, the president was on the ballot, and also was the Supreme Court nominees were on the ballot. The process that the United States Senate went through was an embarrassment to the country. Not only did they drag Senator Kavanaugh's, Judge Kavanaugh's family through the mud, they also dragged outed a Me Too movement woman that wanted to stay anonymous. And what is amazing to me is this. With the hush fund that's down there in Washington, they're questioning the credibility of a Supreme Court judge. And I think the people and names on that should be exposed. I don't know what they're hiding behind, but I sure wouldn't want to send my daughter down there. There's pretty powerful people down in Washington, but the whole process should have been a lot easier. Look, because they can't garner enough public support for policies, they have to go to an activist judge. What we need to do is the legislatures down in Washington need to legislate and not look to the activist courts to fulfill their policies.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. Murphy, you have 30 seconds.
Well, President Trump did win the election, but he didn't win it here in Connecticut. And ultimately, my job is to represent the state of Connecticut. And people here in Connecticut didn't support Judge Kavanaugh. In fact, they were very worried about what he was going to do to try to help President Trump steal health care away from the residents of this state. So it doesn't really matter to me what the whole country thinks. It matters to me what people here in Connecticut think. And people in Connecticut didn't want Judge Kavanaugh put on the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. The next question goes to you. Sure. How have the Trump tax cuts been good or bad for Connecticut? And if elected, will you work to keep them in place or repeal them?
As a small business owner, it's helped myself. It's helped a lot of small businesses here in the state of Connecticut. Look, UTC Pratt Whitney had brought back 35,000 jobs from overseas. 3,500 of them supported Connecticut. It's helping small businesses grow. We need that tax cut. Unfortunately, Connecticut's looking in from the outside. Senator Murphy says he wants to put up a blue wall here in Connecticut for Trump policies. He's so disconnected with the residents of the state of Connecticut because Connecticut's ranked 49th in economic growth, slowest growing state in the New England states. We need to move forward. The country is moving forward. Businesses are thriving because of that. They're reinvesting in this country. We have people that are taking the leap of faith at the age of 56 years old. A friend of mine went from a 2-man machine shop to an 8-man machine shop. The biggest things I'm hearing from manufacturers, I take the tour of Connecticut, they can't find enough qualified help. There's 13,000 manufacturing jobs open here in the state of Connecticut. We need to fill those jobs.
Mr. Murphy, you have 1 minute.
So this Trump tax bill was an assault on Connecticut, and I fought it with everything that I had because it represents the biggest tax increase on Connecticut taxpayers in the history of our state. It is a over $1 billion increase on Connecticut. Why? Because you cannot any longer deduct from your federal income taxes, your state taxes, or your income taxes. And so you're going to see middle-class families all across the state, once this bill is fully implemented, having their taxes go up. And of course, a Connecticut senator should be fighting against a tax bill that increases our taxes, which, by the way, gives 80% of the benefits of that tax bill to the richest 1% of Americans. That's an abomination. And so I did fight that tax bill with everything that I had because it is going to result in a major tax increase on the people of Connecticut. And if I'm reelected, I'm going to go back and fight to reverse a tax bill that increases taxes by $1 billion in our state.
Mr. Corey, 30 seconds to rebut.
So what Senator Murphy's saying is he wants to adopt Governor Malloy's policies of higher taxes because he thinks he can spend individuals' money better than the small business people can spend money. The small business people are creating jobs around the country. There's 6.7 million job openings here in the state of in the entire country. State of Connecticut cannot find enough workers. People are feeling confident. The rest of the country should not suffer because Connecticut cannot get its fiscal house in order. This is a federal position. The federal government is providing jobs. It is making businesses more business friendly in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. Murphy, how would you handle the caravan of migrants approaching the southern border of the United States? This question is from one of our viewers, Barbara Nonenberg Fontana of Rocky Hill.
Well, I'll say two things about it. One, I've long supported a stronger border. In fact, I've supported legislation that will put billions of additional dollars into fencing and personnel along the border. At the same time, I don't think that these individuals coming to the United States from Honduras should be treated differently than anyone else who is showing up here and applying for asylum. If you are fleeing violence, if you are rescuing your children from potential death, then you should be able to apply for asylum, for refugee status in the United States. If these refugees, if these immigrants meet that bar, then they can be protected here in the United States, as we have protected generations of refugees before. If they don't meet that bar, then they should be sent back home. And the fact that President Trump is using this as a political wedge, trying to make us scared of our neighbors, of people who have different skin colors than us, is abhorrent to me. We should solve the immigration problem, and we should treat these people coming to the United States no different than how we treat anybody else.
Thank you, Mr. Corey.
Look, it's always the identity politics. Well, if you're talking about an immigrant, my father was an immigrant. I'm half Irish and I'm half Lebanese. Look, we want people to come to our country legally. This is the failure of Washington to pass immigration reform. The president had a bill on it that would have protected the dreamers. Of course, people are fleeing, but who is hijacking that caravan? We have people from MS-13. The president of Guatemala has already said they found over 100 ISIS members in the terrorist groups in that group. They found over 1,000 MS-13 gang members. Look, we need to listen to law enforcement. The border across from Laredo, Texas is one of the most dangerous borders. Border Patrol is asking for a wall there. They've just 2 months ago, they found over 20 pounds of fentanyl from Mexican citizens that brought that through in Dayton, Ohio. We need border security, strong security. There's human trafficking, pedophilia. There's drugs coming across our border. We need border security. Senator Murphy's for open vetting, European-style vetting. What he is saying is take that risk. As long as you get here, you're able to become a citizen.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. You have 30 seconds.
So I don't know what European-style vetting means. And I also know that this idea that there are hundreds of ISIS members as part of this caravan, that's an internet hoax. That's not true. These are people who are trying to protect their children from potential death and abuse and terror. We should give them the chance to stay in this country if indeed they will be killed when they go back. And this idea that there are ISIS members or Middle Easterners, as the president says, as part of this group is ridiculous.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick time out. We welcome your comments on social media right now. Question goes to Mr. Corey. Canada just legalized the use of recreational marijuana, and some states here, as you know, are doing it. Should the United States legalize pot?
I want to challenge that last question, Dennis. You know, the president of Guatemala has said, that's fine. The president of Guatemala has said gang members and ISIS-related people and terrorists have infiltrated that group. And of course, we want people to flee countries that need to flee countries. But go ahead with the medical marijuana.
No, it's recreational marijuana. Should it be legalized in the U.S.?
Look, we have to declassify. It's a class 1 drug on the federal side. I would like to see more results come out of Denver, Colorado, out of Colorado, where they legalized it. My biggest concern is what the doctors say is brain development up to 24 years old. Let's see the results of that. I am all for medical marijuana. People with terminal illness or illnesses that it can be taken care of, we want that. I want more research in that. I think the government has a big role in playing with research with medical marijuana. Recreational marijuana, I would leave that up to the states, but we have to declassify. It's a class 1.
Mr. Murphy. Yeah, I don't fundamentally disagree. I think this is a question for the state legislature to answer, and I think it is important for the federal government to step back and get out of the way and let states make that decision. I agree that you've got to reclassify marijuana. I also think that you've got to make sure that if you do want to have an economy, either around medicinal marijuana or upon recreational marijuana, that you should have those companies be able to do banking, which is very hard to do today. So I've long supported medicinal marijuana, and I think the federal government just needs to step back and let the state government make the decision for themselves.
30 seconds, sir.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would do too. I mean, states' rights, but they got to declassify it.
All right, let's move on to our next question, Mr. Murphy. If the Democrats win the Senate, Beto O'Rourke, a Senate candidate in Texas, and some other candidates across the country, Democrats are vowing to try to impeach President Trump. Do you support that? And if that does take seed in the Senate, will you try to stop it?
So I certainly don't support it because I want to see this investigation come to fruition from Robert Mueller. There are obviously some very serious allegations that have been made, and the special counsel is doing some serious work. If it does turn out that President Trump and his campaign colluded with the Russians to try to manipulate the 2016 election, then we're going to have a conversation about what to do next. But I do think it's premature now for anyone, including Democrats in Congress, to be calling for the president's impeachment. I may disagree with much of the way that the president conducts himself, with the manner in which he runs the White House, but he was elected. He was elected with the full knowledge on behalf of the country that he was going to be a very different kind of president. And ultimately, the decision about impeachment can't come until you have this investigation filed by the special counsel.
Mr. Corey,
look, this is the main purpose of the Senate and the House getting the majority down there. The first mission, what they said that we're going to do, is they're going to impeach this president. Not only that, they're going to impeach the Supreme Court Judge Kavanaugh. Connecticut cannot afford to keep looking in from the outside. It's going to bog the government down and obstruct this administration for the next 2 to 6 years. That's why Connecticut has a choice to send somebody down to Washington to work with this administration. Let the investigation come through. There has been no evidence pointing to the president of collusion. There's not another administration that's been harder on Russia than this president. We need someone to work with this administration and bring those much-needed federal funds home to Connecticut so we can move Connecticut forward.
I know you have 20 seconds left. Would you fight to stop any impeachment?
I would fight to stop an impeachment. I think it's another obstruction. There's an election in 2016. There's no respect for this administration. There's no respect for a lot of these government agencies.
And you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Well, I mean, listen, I think you have to wait for the report to come in. I'm not sure it makes sense to say that under no circumstances would you support impeachment when it could be that the special counsel is going to present some fairly serious evidence to Congress. Listen, my position with Trump is pretty simple. I'm going to fight him like heck when he's doing something terrible for the state, like trying to repeal protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And I'm going to work with him when he's doing something that I think is good for the state, like increasing funding for manufacturing jobs and for defense jobs, as we've done in the last 2 years. I'll fight him when it's right, and I'll work with him when it's right for the state.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to take a quick time out, another commercial break. We'll be right back. We welcome your comments either on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Welcome back to this U.S. Senate debate. Mr. Corey, this next question goes to you. How would you rate President Trump's policy toward North Korea? Is it working? And if elected, what would you do to change it or keep it going?
It is working. Well, look, we need to set up diplomatic solutions instead of military solutions. There's 3 carrier groups off to North Korea. We're doing this through economic might and military might. Senator Murphy was calling the president unstable when he was on an Asian Pacific tour, which was just wrong. While Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, was bringing 3 Americans home. It was a wonderful thing. Not only that, there's 77 families here in the state of Connecticut. They're waiting for answers for their missing, and that was a great gesture by President Kim to bring that home. We need diplomatic solutions, and I think it's the right way to go. You can't have it both ways. You can't say and be upset that we stop joint military exercises with North Korea while he's having diplomatic solutions there. Look, This president's got something going. It's working right. The president's coming to the table. President Kim is coming to the table. We want peace through North Korea. We just need China to come to the table, and I believe they will.
Mr. Murphy.
Well, I certainly support talking to the North Koreans. This is a global threat, the idea that the North Koreans can put a weapon on top of an ICBM that can reach the United States. But I think, unfortunately, that Kim has negotiated circles around this president. Think about it. Kim has gotten everything that he wants. He's gotten a number of important photo ops with the president and with the Secretary of State. He's got the cancellation of these military exercises that the United States does with South Korea. And he's had to make almost no concessions with respect to his nuclear program. He shut down a testing facility that he was already going to shut down, but there are absolutely no signs that he is actually stopping or refraining from continuing to make weapons and missile technology that will reach the United States. This president told us that he was a good negotiator, but so far on the global stage, he's been a terrible negotiator. He's interested in photo ops, but he's not interested in actually forcing countries like the North Koreans to change their behavior. So I'm willing to support negotiation, but this negotiation has not gone well for the United States thus far.
Mr. Corey, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
It's just simply not true. You saw the parade that they had, and they had no ballistic missiles. There has been no more missiles firing over Guam, firing over Japan. He's brought this negotiations to the table. You got to give it a chance. The president's on the right track of doing that. We have economic sanctions, some of the strongest sanctions in North Korea. We just have to make sure China is abiding by that. The president's on the right track with this. Because we have such an economic strength here in this country, we're able to negotiate not only peace through strength through our military, but economically, and it's working.
In our closing minutes, we will now shift to our rapid fire segment of the debate, and we'll begin with Senator Murphy. Do you pledge to serve a 6-year term if reelected?
I do. My intention is to serve 6 years.
I would serve 6 years and no more than 2 terms for United States Senator.
Mr. Corey, do you believe Christine Blasey Ford's claim that she was sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh?
I believe she was sexually assaulted, but there was no evidence in corroboration that it was Brett Kavanaugh.
Mr. Murphy.
I do believe her. I thought she was credible, powerful.
Mr. Murphy, do you believe Juanita Broderick's claim that she was sexually assaulted by Bill Clinton?
I think there are some very credible allegations that have been made and very concerning ones.
Look, I believe women should come forward, and they should come forward in a different manner than what they did down there to Ms. Ford.
Mr. Corey, if the next governor, be it Lamont, Stefanowski, or Griebel, came to you seeking help to get some tolls either approved by the federal government or federal funding to install them, would you assist?
I would not assist. I don't think we need another tax on the residents of the state of Connecticut, but I'd be more than happy to work with any governor or any mayor in our great cities.
I'd work with Governor Lamont, who has talked about putting tolls on these commercial trucks that come in and out of our state. It seems that it makes sense we should ask them to pay for the usage of our roads.
Mr. Murphy, do you support Congressman Larson's proposal to build a tunnel under the Connecticut River, which of course will require federal funding?
I do, and my understanding is that it may cost just as much money, potentially less money, than some of the alternative plans to rebuild that interchange. I think it could really transform the city of Hartford.
Mr. Corey.
I think it's a great idea. I just would like to see more private sector growth in that area. But my main focus would be the I-95 corridor, the Northeast rail system that we have down there, and the 2 largest ports outside of New York City, which are Bridgeport and New Haven. I'd like to see more federal funds go in there and to take a lot of heat off our highway systems.
As you know, we've had several school shootings since Sandy Hook. Do you support armed guards at Connecticut schools?
Look, Senator Murphy's kids get to enjoy Washington, D.C., where most of the majority of the schools down there have armed resource officers. I think it'd be a wonderful thing for teachers and students to reach out to an armed resource officer to say if there's a problem child, whether that problem's happening in school or at home.
Mr. Murphy.
I think it's up to each individual school. I certainly don't support arming teachers. I think that's a terrible idea. But many school districts have chosen to have police officers on site, and I think that that's an individual decision for each school district.
Senator Murphy, Congresswoman Maxine Waters has called on people to protest and confront Republicans at restaurants, their homes, and stores. Do you support that? I
think it's best if you leave your political dissent to more appropriate forums. So I think this is a time in which people need to raise their voices. I think you should probably find the right forums to do that.
Mr. Corey.
I just don't understand why Senator Murphy is so silent and not condemning the actions of not only elected officials but past elected officials. I thought it was a wonderful thing that the First Lady came out and President Trump condemned these bomb threats that are happening around the country.
Mr. Corey, Which letter grade would you give President Trump?
Probably give him an A. I'll give him an A+ once I'm down there.
Mr. Murphy.
I don't really give letter grades. I think he's been a disaster for this state, and I think he'll continue to be a disaster for this state going forward.
Well, I'll ask a follow-up. Which letter grade would you give Governor Malloy for his performance?
Like I said, I don't give letter grades. I think Dan Malloy has had a tough job to do. I might not agree with every decision he's made, but he had a tough set of cards handed to him at the beginning of his term.
Mr. Corey.
I'd give Governor Malloy pretty much enough. So you can see the two different spectrums of the two leaders. One leader is bringing jobs and making the economy great, and one leader is destroying Connecticut with higher taxes.
Mr. Corey, is Connecticut better off today than it was 20 years ago?
It's better off within the last 2 years because of the economic growth. Even the pension funds are rising just due to what President Trump has been doing for businesses.
Mr. Murphy.
That's a tough question to answer in a lightning round. I think there are a lot of sectors that are in better shape. We have more manufacturing jobs. There are a lot of sectors that have been hurting, so I think that's a tough one.
That concludes this WFSB U.S. Senate debate. We thank our participants, Chris Murphy and Matthew Corey. Best of luck on Election Day. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you, Matt.
You too.
Nice job, gentlemen. Thanks for coming out.